Tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome everybody to the second webinar in our three-part Westpac Smarts series, where we hope to bring practical tips to our business community and insights from our business partners and customers to help you manage the various challenges that have come with the COVID-19 pandemic and to help you prepare for the new normal. My name is Amber McKnight, Head of Professional Services, Health, Education and Local Government for Westpac Business Bank. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Sam Gadd, Founder and Director of HumanKind and the Employee Experience Design School, and Gillian Service, Employment Lawyer and Partner at Minter Ellison Rudd Watts. We're here this morning to discuss some of the new HR challenges for businesses, including employee wellbeing and leading through COVID-19, the global Great Resignation, and the vaccination debate. Before I pass to Sam and Gillian, I just want to acknowledge how incredibly challenging the current environment is to just operate in, let alone lead through or plan for what 2022 and beyond will look like. At Westpac, we understand how difficult things are for businesses in the current environment, and we are here to help you navigate some of the challenges you may face. We hope today's discussion provides you with some practical tips to help you, your business, and your employees. So as part of today's discussion, we'll start with staff wellbeing and leading through COVID-19. We'll move on to the vaccination debate and then close out the initial sort of discussion with the Great Resignation discussion. Throughout this, please feel free to ask questions on the side of the screen, and we'll try to get to as many of those at the end as we can. So firstly, to start today's discussion, Sam, would you like to tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Hi, morena everyone. I'm Sam. I'm the founder of HumanKind. HumanKind is a professional services business based in Wellington and Auckland. We've worked with over 700 organisations across New Zealand building better workplaces and are obsessed with employee experience. And recently I have launched another business called Employee Experience Design School. This is an online program teaching people around New Zealand and hopefully globally how to become employee experience designers. Really exciting time as leaders and organisations learn how to take an employee-centred approach to designing better employee experiences. I'm thrilled to be on this webinar, so thank you very much for the invite. Outside of work, I'm also the proud mum of 3 young boys, so that's what keeps me busy outside of work. So thank you for having me.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sam. And so Gillian, would you like to do the same?
Thanks very much, Amber. My name is Gillian Service. Morena, everybody. It's very nice to be with you all this morning. I lead a team of fabulous employment lawyers at Minter Ellison Rudd Watts, and we need to give them a very big shout out because while I'm here doing this, they are very busy working on a whole raft of questions from businesses around vaccinations in the workplace and how we navigate the new normal. So big shout out to them. Thank you very much, team. You are doing a stellar job. My focus is very much on people. It has been for my whole career. So whether it's employment law, health and safety, privacy, human rights, that has kept my focus as I've worked my way from Scotland originally to London and now to New Zealand. And when a bit like Sam, when I'm not at work, I am kept busy, not with 3 young children, though. I'm kept busy with many outdoor pursuits and a husband that I need to run around after like a Jack Russell. He keeps me on my toes. So I'll hand back to you, Amber, and we can get on with the webinar. And thanks very much for the invite to join and share some thoughts on these interesting topics.
Brilliant. Thank you both. It's great to have you both joining us today. So the first topic we're going to sort of talk through or discuss is staff wellbeing and leading through COVID-19. The COVID-19 pandemic has been long and drawn out. In New Zealand, we've been lucky enough to retain a level of normality for most of the last 18 months that many other countries have not. However, the lockdowns we face, particularly in Auckland, have been much tougher. And as a country with large industry sectors built around international tourists, students and workers, as well as reliance on international trade, the tough border restrictions has undoubtedly had a significant economic impact. But beyond the economic impact, the uncertainty, stress, isolation, business restructures and operational changes have all had a significant people impact, changing how we lead and how we work. This is across the board and not just limited to businesses. And it has really put the spotlight on employee wellbeing and the obligations of employers to look after their people, regardless of whether they're able to work during lockdown or not. With COVID-19 changing our work habits, unfortunately, we're seeing emerging trends of burnout and overwork. In fact, the research emerging from the US, Europe and Australia suggests mental health implications of the pandemic could be more significant and universal and could long outlast the physical impacts of COVID-19. I do acknowledge that in my role, I am privileged to be able to work through lockdown, but no one is immune to the fatigue these periods can bring. Working from home has some benefits, such as full-time activewear, greater flexibility during the workday, and less time commuting. But there are downsides, including Zoom fatigue, loss of clear work-life boundary, and like for many of my colleagues, being not only fantastic bankers during the work week, but also teachers, child entertainers, argument negotiators, cleaners, and chefs. So Sam, with this high level of lockdown fatigue, along with these emerging trends of burnout and overwork setting in among employees, what should we be doing with, looking at with our teams to help them through this, but also ensuring that we're setting up a wellbeing strategy beyond this point?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think so many of us are exhausted after the last 18 months, and that includes us as leaders. And I always want to tell leaders to really put their own oxygen mask on first, because if we're not looking after ourselves, we certainly won't be able to look after others. And I think also recognising for our employees that this wellbeing stuff, it's different for everyone. It's very much a one size fits one. Everyone's got their own individual stresses going on around family and friends potentially overseas suffering from other things, and we can't get to them. So remembering that everyone's got their own stresses. I think for us, we often think about well-being in lots of different ways, but one of the things is that we are inherently social beings and we want to connect with people. So making sure we are really connecting individually with our employees and our teams and checking in on them and asking them how they are and telling them that it's okay to not be okay. I think also as leaders being really prepared to share our own vulnerabilities and our own emotions during these times, because that will encourage others to reach out for support and practice self-care and make sure that people also know that normal work expectations aren't necessarily there during this time. I think we've got to remember that we're not working from home, we're at home trying to work during a crisis, and those are two very different things. So really giving our people a bit of a break on the productivity stuff where necessary to make sure that they can look after their own well-being. In terms of thinking forward for wellbeing strategies, I think it's really important to understand firstly what wellbeing means to your people, because wellbeing means something very different to everyone. So I always like to think about setting up a wellbeing strategy, finding out what wellbeing means to your individual people, and really starting to create a program that's going to be meaningful for your team. And that might mean, finding out what the focus areas are going to be. At HumanKind, we call them pillars. So we've got 4 pillars of wellbeing at HumanKind, and those are mental wellbeing, work wellbeing, physical health, and social connectedness. And if you can get your employees involved in the design of your wellbeing program. So first of all, finding out what wellbeing means. And then when you find out what those key focus areas are going to be for your people, maybe getting an employee-led group to set up different activities or programs of work under those focus areas so that it really meets the individual needs of your people. It's not something you can just pick up off the shelf from someone else. And I think when it's employee owned and employee led, you're going to get really great buy-in for that. So it's just a couple of ideas about wellbeing programs looking forward.
Great, thanks for that, Sam. So yeah, really good pointers to look at in terms of the pillars, and also bringing employees into actually understanding what it is that they are really looking for. And so I guess with this, COVID-19 has brought this kind of new dimension in leadership that maybe wasn't as much in focus before. So, such as, you talked a bit about sort of empathy, but also that coaching element. And there's also things where we are leading outside of the normal constructs of the office, which is new to a lot of people. So what do you sort of see as some of those top skills leaders need to be working on now, but also in the post-COVID-19 environment?
It's a really good question. I've been sort of saying for the last couple of years that I think being a leader is just getting harder and harder, because we're expected to, be able to collaborate and communicate really well, be visionary and purpose-led and vulnerable and transparent and empathetic and all of these things that we've not really had time to go away and build all these new capabilities. But I think looking forward, certainly empathy is absolutely key. And just touching on what I mentioned before, that vulnerability, able to show your own weakness, or maybe show your people that you don't always have the answers, and be willing to ask them for input, I think is a really strong leadership skill in this time. And I think looking forward, that's not going to go anywhere. I also think, looking at the world of work, it's changing so dramatically. Being open to new ways of working and willing to co-design those with your people. So if we were thinking about changing something for our customers, we wouldn't do that without consulting with our customers and listening to them and finding out what's going to make it better for them. So really thinking about that from the employee perspective, we shouldn't be changing anything in the employee experience without involving them in the design of that. So as a leader, how do we become employee-centered, or really have an openness and a willingness to look at new ways of working, and as that sort of evolves?
Thank you for sharing those points. And we've done a bit of work internally around well-being and what that sort of means, and as a leader, how you need to lead that out, which is quite different to what I've sort of learned from before. But a big part of that is sort of like we model sort of performance behaviours in the office, but actually modelling mentally healthy workplace behaviours. And some of that training, some of the things I've sort of taken out of that is, and we're working in a new environment, working at home, but actually reviewing the new norms, the new behaviours, new operating rhythms, and kind of having that kind of stop, start, continue discussion with yourself and going, actually, to ensure I'm supporting healthy habit formation, I probably need to stop just constantly coming into my office from the lounge or on the weekend. So I think some of those are the discussions that we're trying to have internally around how do we actually set up for a new work from home environment for that as well.
Absolutely, and it is continuing to change all the time. And I think role modelling the fact that you can take those breaks and get outside and get physical exercise and look after your well-being, and sharing that with your team is such a great way to start.
No, thanks. It was really great. Practical tips in there, and we'll send out a few of those in that sort of the following email after the session as well. But hopefully people can take a few of those and actually look at how do we look after ourselves first, and then role model for our teams as we're building the strategies, but also getting through this period at the moment. So I guess the next thing that we want to sort of move on to in terms of our discussion here is really around the vaccination debate. So the vaccination debate, as we all know, has become this increasingly hot topic when we look at how to ensure people and customers are protected, and that business can operate efficiently. We know it's key to easing restrictions and entering the new normal, the new normal being a world that's fundamentally changed by the pandemic, but also where you can travel within your country, internationally, attend events, and live without fear of another lockdown around the corner. As a response to a number of these issues, the government has mandated vaccinations in education and healthcare workers. We've also seen some businesses recently announce their own vaccine mandates, and they will only be allowing vaccinated staff and customers into their offices. At Westpac, our priority has been very much on educating and encouraging our employees to get vaccinated. And like other businesses, we're also looking at what other options are there as well. So I guess, Gillian, for those that may be leading small businesses, or ones where work from home is just not an option, how do they go about addressing some of the practical issues arising from the vaccination landscape, such as managing a workplace with unvaccinated people and addressing concerns that vaccinated people may be working beside unvaccinated people?
Yeah, it's a complicated space. Before I move to the practical piece, I think it's worth just bearing in mind the legislative landscape, because it is complex and it actually brings together all the areas that I work in. So it brings in the Health and Safety at Work Act, it brings in the Employment Relations Act, it brings in the Privacy Act, it brings in the Human Rights Act, and overarching all of that, you've got the fundamental position under the Bill of Rights Act that individuals can be free from medical treatment. And so you have to balance all of these pieces of legislation. But where does that get you? And I'm very conscious that a lot of the businesses I'm dealing with have got large resources to be able to work out and navigate that legislative spectrum. What seems to be pretty clear is that small businesses don't have access to that. And so hopefully through this, I can give you a few pointers of where to start. And the starting point is to just take a moment and take a breath, because there's a million questions that you want to ask, but go to fundamentals. And the fundamentals is, under the Employment Relations Act, there's the duty of good faith. That underpins the employment relationship between employer and employee. And the duty of good faith is actually a really straightforward one, because it's the duty to talk to each other at a fundamental level. I mean, the exact language in the Act talks about how both employers and employees have to be active and constructive and responsive and communicative in maintaining productive employment relationships. So if you think about that language, that's talking to each other. And that puts a duty on not just the employer to talk to the employee, but on the employee to talk to the employer. And I think that's really, for small businesses, important to remember. I'm seeing quite a few situations in the lockdown scenario where employees are just stopping engaging and saying, I'm not coming to that meeting. I'm not talking to you about this. Employees have got a duty to, just as you've got a duty to talk to them about what you want to do in your workplace around the topic of vaccination. So go back to just straightforward talking to each other, because that is you meeting your duty of good faith and reminding employees that they've got that obligation too. It's a two-way street, the duty of good faith. I think that's important to remember. The other key thing is, as a business owner, you're a person conducting a business or undertaking under the Health and Safety at Work Act. That's a person conducting a business or undertaking, or the acronym is PCBU. And all PCBUs have a duty to keep workers and others in the workplace safe and to eliminate or minimize risk to the extent that it can be reasonably practically done. And that's where vaccinations come in, and whether vaccinations are a measure that you feel you need to take within your business to meet that obligation to keep workers safe. Is it a reasonably practicable step? And the thing to think about there is not just whether vaccination is a reasonably practicable step, but you've got to think about all the other things that are available as well, because there's many other control measures, and it shouldn't just be vaccinations alone. And so when you're having a conversation with your workers around what you want to do to keep people safe and what you think you need within the business to keep people safe, it's looking at not just vaccination, it's looking at testing. And a good practical point is to keep your eye out for media and announcements around testing. There's 25 large businesses now trialling saliva testing. They've managed to persuade the government into a saliva testing trial. And so I do think that sort of technology is going to be coming and becoming more available. So that is something, when you look forward, I think will be part of the mix. Right now, though, we don't have that generally available. But if I look beyond New Zealand and I look to what's happening in other countries, I've got friends and family in the UK, in Sweden, Hong Kong, France. And when I see what's happening over there, testing, saliva testing and rapid flow tests, they are used routinely. Kids are using them before they go to school on a daily basis. People are being issued with kits that they have in their houses. So if they're going to an event, they test before they go to an event. So I do think that's going to be part of our future. But for right now, vaccinations, mask wearing, good social distancing, all the things we've already learned in terms of cleanliness and hygiene. So those things need to be part of the conversation with workers about how you keep them safe. The other thing to think about is how you decide whether there are roles within your business that you think should be done by a vaccinated worker. And the starting point is you can't require a person to be vaccinated. The Bill of Rights Act gets in the way of that. That's not going to be permissible in New Zealand. But what you can do, and what WorkSafe have been really clear about, is to say, if you run a risk assessment and you assess the risk of the person contracting COVID, and you assess that to be high in the role that they're doing, then you can require that that role is to be performed by a vaccinated worker. And then the question becomes whether the incumbent in the role is vaccinated or not. So be really clear around that distinction, because our general position, which Amber's already set out, is vaccinations can only be mandated for a portion of the workforce, and that is education, it's the health sector, and it's all of our border workers and MIQ workers, because they're covered by a public health order for vaccinations. Everyone else, every other business that's not covered by those vaccination orders, you need to go through this health and safety assessment and assess risk of the role and whether the role now needs to be done by a vaccinated worker. And when you're assessing that risk, there's two things to think about. First is, what's the likelihood of the person contracting COVID? And the second is, what would the impact on the broader community then be if that worker had COVID? How much would they spread it? If my role is to be, if I'm a barman at an event and I'm going to see 200 people in that evening, if I have COVID, then it's going to be a big impact on the community if I spread it, because I'm going to see 200 people in a day. So those are sort of the things that you need to think about. And WorkSafe have got a very helpful list of questions that you can ask as you're making that risk assessment. And Amber is going to be circulating after the event a follow-up, and we'll include that link to that list of questions that you can work through as part of the follow-up.
Great, thank you, Gillian. Really important points to go across, and as she said, we'll be sending some helpful links out at the end as well. So I guess another part of that, and you sort of touched on it a bit, just around that sort of the privacy part of this. So in terms of privacy requirements, in terms of holding employee vaccination information or that of customers, is there anything that businesses need to be aware of? And I guess for some of those where maybe you are mandating it or you're making a decision around who can come to the office or not, to what extent are we legally required to obtain and maintain a record of vaccination status for employees?
If you choose to ask people for their vaccination status, then the information you receive, the Privacy Commissioner has been really clear, is personal information that's covered by the Privacy Act. So if you've decided that you need to collect that information and have that information, then you will need to make sure that you're holding and handling that information consistent with the Privacy Act. You've got to have a lawful purpose for gathering information. The lawful purpose in this situation is managing your health and safety risk, because if you're trying to meet your obligation under the Health and Safety at Work Act to keep workers safe, part of the equation is knowing whether they're vaccinated or not. So that your lawful purpose for gathering the information and asking the question is based around the Health and Safety at Work Act. Once you've got that information, you can only use it for the purpose for which you've collected it, keeping workers safe. Can't use it for anything else. And you can only retain it for as long as it's necessary for that particular purpose. In terms of asking for that information, the key thing to be remembering is that employees are not obliged to tell you the answer. So you can ask, but employees don't have to tell you. So the way to manage that at a practical level is that when you ask the question, and again, this is guidance that's out on the Privacy Commissioner's website, when you ask the question, are you vaccinated or not, you can assume that the worker is unvaccinated if they won't tell you the answer, provided when you ask the question, you tell them you'll make that assumption. So basically, when you go out and say to people, are you vaccinated or not? And please be aware that in answering this question, if you choose to say that you're not willing to disclose, we as an organisation will treat you as unvaccinated, and we will assume that you're unvaccinated for the purposes of managing our health and safety risk. So that's the key way to handle that issue.
And I guess there's a number of different sort of businesses and different sort of sizes on the call as well. So for businesses that probably maybe have limited access to employment lawyers or an in-house HR team, what are sort of some of the specific areas that they should be paying attention to, or specifically seeking advice on?
Yeah, so there's good resources out on the WorkSafe website which we've mentioned, and we'll make sure that link's circulated. The MB website as well, which we'll put a link to as part of the follow-up, talks through the various different scenarios that you might come across. And so that's a really good starting point if you haven't been there yet. That is good information. If you're looking for where things are going to go from a trends perspective, actually looking at what some of the large companies are doing is helpful. But it may not apply to you because large businesses have different things that they're trying to manage. And you can reach out to, if you're looking for specific legal advice, the Law Society gives you a range of different lawyers that you can reach out to. I mean, obviously we're specialists in our field, and we can assist, but there's lots of other that people that can assist, and they don't need to be in big law firms like Minter, Ellison, Rudd Watts. Employment lawyers throughout New Zealand are coming up to speed with all of these issues. And so if you have a local employment lawyer that you deal with, then you should be reaching out to them, particularly if you are looking to either mandate vaccinations, change employment agreements to add the condition that people have to be vaccinated, or if you're going to dismiss a worker over their vaccination status. Those are all things that you should be getting advice on.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Gillian. Really helpful advice and pointers for everyone in the audience today. I guess, as the next part of our discussion today in terms of the Great Resignation. So while COVID-19 pandemic has opened up conversations about wellbeing, which we've talked through, and vaccinations, there's also this other area that's making headlines around the world, including recently New Zealand, which is the Great Resignation. The pandemic has allowed people time to rethink their careers, work environment, and future aspirations. It has changed people's mindsets on what they want to do and how they want to work. Before COVID-19, remote working was already gaining traction, but the pandemic and the lockdowns that have come with it have seen many businesses leap ahead in terms of the use of technology and flexible working arrangements. The skills required are also changing, as well as the way organisations are structured and the way they operate. The combination of a changing mindset, changing ways of working, coupled with the pandemic workload and burnout, has led to a widespread trend of workers leaving their jobs since the pandemic began. Many businesses we talk to across a variety of industry sectors are struggling with talent retention and their talent pipeline, made even tougher by the border restrictions. So I guess, Sam, the last 18 months has seen this major and fast shift in the way people work and really making them think hard about what they want out of their jobs. What are some of the trends that you're seeing coming out of New Zealand and overseas that we need to think about when retaining talent and also hiring the right people?
I think, this trend of people wanting purpose in their work is still really strong. And we've seen this over the last few years come about, but I definitely think the last 18 months has just accelerated all the future of work trends. Employees are looking for understanding around what they are doing, how it's helping people and who they're helping. So they want to have purpose in what they're doing every day. And also this demand for flexibility has accelerated as well. I think it's sort of naive for people to think that we can have this huge flexible work sort of trial last year and then to go back to what it was before. Now that's just not acceptable, I think, to most employees, and so many employers are offering huge amounts of flexibility and choice around how people work, where they work, when they work. Then I think really, if you're wanting to keep up and attract the best talent in the market, we need to be thinking about what your offering is around that. But I certainly think people are looking for purpose, they're looking for flexibility. And then the last thing I'd say is really people are looking for connection. People want to connect with the work they're doing, the people in their organisations and their leaders. And if we're not really actively figuring out how we can enable that connection, which is obviously harder when people are working remotely, I think it's really important for us to be thinking really deliberately around how we're building culture, how we're helping organisations to, build connections. And we can do that online. It's harder, but it just takes a real deliberate focus. So those are probably the three things from me.
And I guess, Gillian, are you seeing some of the same trends, or are you seeing anything sort of different from in your work or your friends sort of overseas?
Look, I would absolutely echo everything that Sam is saying. And when I look at what's happening in workplaces overseas, they're ahead of us now because they're grappling with people who have been in lockdowns for 9 months plus. My brother-in-law was out of his office for a year, and even now only goes back in on a third. And so their whole team is never back together as one. And I think the thing I'm seeing overseas that is going to be, I think, the next thing for leaders to deal with is that hybrid model of how you manage a team and lead a team when you're in a different context. Because if you're all in lockdown, you're all in the same context. If you're all in the office, you're all in the same context. And that makes leadership easier because you're dealing with one dynamic. as soon as you split that and you have people on different arrangements, whether that's forced because you've got a mandate in place where you can only have a third of the office populated for keeping people spread, and I'm still seeing that with colleagues and friends overseas, whether it's that or it's actually just because of rolling different flexible arrangements, leaders are going to need to really dial up and learn a new skill. I was at a session up at Auckland University before the lockdown. It would have been in about July, and I was speaking to one of the professors of the business school there, saying, this is your next thing you need to run a course on, because this is where we're headed and this is what's coming next. And thankfully she was really engaged in that idea. So through a bit of conversation, we've given her some thoughts to go and put a new course together on this, because I do think this is a topic which we're going to see change on it, and it's a skill that we haven't had to deploy yet.
That's definitely right. I guess that's sort of that's one of those things of what are employers needing to think about today to respond to this changing landscape. We've got the change going through the lockdowns at the moment, but as you said, we're sort of looking like we're sort of a bit behind what's happening overseas. So I guess with that, in terms of employers, and the way people want to work as well, what are some of the things that we really need to be thinking about or putting in place to ensure that we are, I guess, leaping up to where things need to be, but also continuing to adjust that?
Sam, do you want to take first?
Yeah, sure. For me, I think it's actually just asking our employees, right? So we're coming up to this thing, the Great Resignation, and I think it's real that people sort of do exit interviews and find out what could have been different or could have been better. But I'm a real fan of stay interviews. Why aren't we asking the people that are staying in our organisations what is working really well for them, what they're looking for more of, what's getting in the way of a great employee experience, and really seeking that input and then getting them involved in the design of that. I think I love the concept of promise versus reality, and I think where organisations come into problems is when there's a real gap between the promise and the reality, and the promise being, in every employee's mind, they've got a promise of what they're expecting from their employer, what they're expecting from their organisation when they show up every day. And we need to understand that. And if we think about that from our perspective, it's the employee value proposition. What are we actually putting out there as what our employees are going to receive receive every day in their work? And so, and the employee experience is the reality. So we need to make sure that whatever we're saying to employees or whatever our brand is saying to people about what it's going to feel like to work in our organizations is actually delivered. And the only way we can find that out is by talking to our people. So as leaders, just being really responsive and sitting down and having those conversations, or catching people in the hallway, or grabbing a quick Zoom, whatever it is, and asking people what's going on for them and how things could improve. I think that's going to be key to making sure that we're successful into the future and able to retain our great talent and able to attract new talent.
And I guess, Gillian, is there anything that you're seeing around that space as well?
Yeah, if I could just add to that, I think the two things for me for leaders are it's curiosity and interest in two directions. One is looking out. Be curious and be interested about what's happening overseas and what's happening elsewhere, because the trends that we're seeing overseas will deliver and arrive here at some point. And so look at what's happening offshore in the work experience. And there's lots of different podcasts, there's lots of articles, there's a heap of material you can get. So set time aside to be curious to learn about what is going on. And then the other piece to set time aside and be curious about is your people. Be curious and be interested in them. Work out what they want to do with their career. We've just started within our team building career plans which look at the whole person, not just, oh, I want to do this type of law and I want to have worked one of these types of cases. It's the whole person. And so a mandatory part of that is making sure you're focused on setting goals with your people around their personal interests and helping them stay accountable to those, whether that's taking up a new hobby or entering an event and getting fit for something if you're going to run a marathon, or even just run a 10K if you've never done a run before. And having those conversations, because that's how you build, to Sam's point, connection. It's how people know that you as a leader are invested in their careers and in them as people. And I think that's a really important part.
I think that's so important, Gillian, and leaders need to be both professionally and personally interested in their people. And, there's so many leaders out there that are actually scared to have that conversation because they've sort of thought it's not their role, but it is your role. If you're a leader on this call and you haven't had the conversations around, what your people are interested in, what they're aiming for outside of work, honestly go there, because it will provide so much payback, because people will feel so much more connected to you, and also they'll feel like they've been understood as a unique human, and that's what people want when they come to work.
And it's a really important point, and I guess it goes back to that wellbeing conversation where, you've got to have those conversations around the whole person, not just the little slice that might come into the office or the work from home environment, but actually everything that's happening in their lives or what they want to sort of achieve as well. So I guess with this as well, there's been a whole lot of a change in terms of organisations and the structures and new skills that are required as well. And a big part of that is, becoming that kind of lifelong learner, and that being a real focus in your businesses as well. What are some of the things that sort of leaders need to be looking at in terms of whether it's putting systems in place to ensure that we're more agile and responsive to these sort of changing skill requirements? But I guess building that into those employee value propositions around how do we continue to upskill as jobs evolve?
Should I take this one, Amber? I think it goes back to the comment I made earlier, setting time aside to work on the business, not just in the business. So time to go, what are the systems that would help? And again, coming back to a bit of a theme, ask your staff, what are the pain points? What gets in the way of doing something, or what takes a really long time just because maybe one bit of software doesn't talk very well to another bit of software. And so a task that could be 5 minutes is instead 20. And then if that's a repetitive task, it's not productive time. And it's also a very frustrating experience for the person who's having to work with it. So take the time to understand the working experience for your team, because that can identify where the pain points are. Certainly I'm seeing a lot of organizations shift to try and do things on different platforms and different work methods. And I think there's a right time and a wrong time to introduce those. I certainly wouldn't be trying to reshape the world when you're in a lockdown, because everyone is just trying to get through. But it can be good thinking time for what comes next once we're out of this, because if you look overseas, one thing is certain, we will move past lockdowns into living with COVID and just living a normal life with COVID. And many countries throughout the world now are in that position. So plan for that to make those changes at that point.
Yeah, and if I can add to that too, it's about as leaders in our organisations, making sure we're constantly on the lookout outside of our organisations around where we're going to go and what skills we're going to need in our businesses as we go there. And I know at HumanKind, as a leader of a small business myself, myself and my CEO and our leadership team, we're constantly thinking about what are the skills that we're going to need in our business for the future and to deliver the future needs of our customers, and making sure that we have really deliberate development happening all the time. So making sure that those training sessions, whether it be new soft skills or new technology that you're bringing in, are booked in and you're constantly evolving. I think the hard thing about COVID is it's made us all shut down and just focus on survival. But that's a really scary thing. If you think that you've been focusing on survival for about the last 18 months, you haven't been looking out and up enough. And that's scary, because things can change, and overseas people are getting back to normal. So we don't want to fall behind by just being in survival mode. We need to start thinking about what's life beyond COVID. How are we going to be operating in this new environment? What are our organisations going to look like? What are the skills that we're going to need? And even though we're exhausted, we have to put some of our time into thinking about the future of our organisations. Otherwise, other people will come in and take our customers. That's just the reality.
No, thank you for that. And, as you say, really important points to be, yes, really challenging time, but we do need to be continuing to think ahead, learn, and see, where we're trying to go as well. So thank you both for some really, really great insights there. And just looking at the time, I think we'll just now move to some of the questions that are coming in from the audience as well, to make sure that we get through those. So, but audience, if you've got any others, just continue to put those in there as well. So the first one we've got here is just there's been a 30% increase in REM levels for hiring. How do you manage expectations with your current workforce when they know the new hire in the same role is probably earning 30% more?
Oh God, that's such a hard one. Oh, I can start with this, Gillian. You can bounce to you if you like, but really, really hard. We're in this position at HumanKind actually that the market for the types of people that we hire just keeps, increasing. And I really don't want to be in the position where we've got amazing internal talent that are paid less than new people coming in just because of their expectations. So I think our drive as a business, and I know our CEO has been doing a lot of work around this, is making sure that overall our REM is meeting where market expectations are. Now, look, that's really challenging because you might not necessarily be making any more on the bottom line to achieve that, but I think the reality is we have to be focusing on productivity and overall profitability to be able to fund those increasing expectations from you. And also just going back to it, it's not just about REM, but this question is specifically about that. But I think it's a far broader employee value proposition that keeps people and attracts good people. You've just got to get the issue of REM off the table by paying enough and meeting those market expectations. So I definitely wouldn't want to be in the position of having talented, really dedicated, high-performing people in my organisation paid less than incoming people.
And Gillian, do you have anything else to add to sort of that?
Well, certainly, I echo the comments that Sam makes. The other piece is, what else do you have on offer that is not REM? If you've got an incredibly strong culture and you're known as a good place to work, then that can often count for a lot in A, retaining people, but also B, attracting people in the door. So it doesn't just, to Sam's point, it doesn't just become about REM conversation because there's other things that you can trade off with. And, the person who only wants the dollars, but the person who wants a really good place to work, where they know that they're going to be valued and where the brand of that workplace in the market is strong, that can count for a lot when it comes to managing expectations.
Yeah, no, it's and I guess that comes back to some of the points you were sort of talking about earlier, Sam, around including employees in the sort of employee value proposition sort of conversations and doing those conversations with your stayers, the people who are staying there, they enjoy it, really understanding what that is, and I guess making sure that you're marketing or that's part of your conversation with hiring new people, what that looks like. So I get the next question we've got from the audience. Clients are now requiring that visitors need to be vaccinated or to be vaccinated to access or access is prohibited, PwC, etc. This means that businesses cannot engage without being vaccinated. Does this make it a role required to be vaccinated? A Gillian question?
That's a me question, definitely. Yeah. Sam's going, phew.
Thanks, Gillian.
We're seeing a lot of this. And one of the obligations, as I mentioned before, a PCBU's got that duty to keep workers and others in the workplace safe. And the others in this question is the visitors. So if you are, maybe if I put it into an example, so if the visitor to the workplace is a sales rep, and what does that mean for the employer of the sales rep? Does the employer of the sales rep need to then require that role to be vaccinated in order to be able to make the visit to the customer? Because that's the sort of practical dynamic that's going to play out in. And it's going to be a factor in it. But the question is, can the visit only be done in person? Because if it's a sales call and you're not vaccinated and you can't therefore go, can the sales call still be done in a different way? And if it can be, then that needs to be explored. You can't just move straight to, well, you don't have a job anymore because you're not vaccinated and that customer requires you to be vaccinated to go and see them. The question is, well, do they have to go and see them? Could someone else go and see them? Can you rejig the working tasks to accommodate that? There's a discrimination issue that you've got to be really careful around this. If somebody is not vaccinated and it is a reason that could be protected by the Human Rights Act, to say they've got a medical condition that could fall within the description of disability under the Human Rights Act, then you've got to be really careful in navigating requirements for that person. That's certainly one that I would recommend you get some advice on.
Great, thanks for that, Gillian. And so just another question, how does workplace culture survive remote working? So how do you get people to buy in when they're remote? And what is the cost of that loss in terms of the future of work? Sam, would you like to?
Yeah, to the first part of that question, I think actually culture can potentially thrive during lockdown. This is when our true colours really shine, and really thinking about how we play into our values and really ensure that our people feel connected to our culture is really important. I'm not going to lie though, it's a lot harder during lockdown because you've got to be far more deliberate. You've got to be really thinking about how you're going to involve people and all the different types of people that you have in your workplace. But I definitely think that if you put the effort in and really think about how you're going to involve individuals in your culture, that it definitely can continue to thrive. And I know that that sense of real connection after going through a lockdown together can be really strong if you do it well. And I know that, you know, I've seen so many employers doing a great job of sending small care packages or having fun meetings where people have to wear a silly hat or whatever the idea is. As long as it's something that your employees will personally value, then I think that goes a long way. What was the second part of that question, Gillian? And the cost?
So it's just how do people buy in when they are remote, and what is the cost of that loss in terms of the future of work?
I mean, so that's assuming there's a loss. I wouldn't necessarily say there's a loss. I think one of the things around buy-in, what's really challenging is onboarding new people in a remote world. And we at HumanKind have done that a lot. We've had 3 new people to start in the last 10 days. And so to be able to not bring them in, do all your normal onboarding, build those personal connections. Again, it's tough, but it can be done. Of course, it's not as good as being in person, but making sure that you deliberately schedule, you know, one-to-one chats with anyone that person needs to build connection with, and give them some prompts around a conversation that's not work or project related. Like get them to talk to each other about each other's, you know, personally and connect on that level. I think those sorts of things work really well. And so, yeah, I think in terms of the future of work, we're going to have to get used to working in these hybrid environments. As Gillian was talking about, you're going to have some people working from home, some people working from the office. We're not going to be all in one situation. And so it's a skill we're going to have to learn. And I think it's about dedicating time to planning about how we're going to build those connections remotely.
Gillian, did you have anything to add to that as well?
No, I'll leave that with Sam's more than capable expertise. That's far more her wheelhouse than mine.
And thank you for that, Sam. I guess it comes back to that, you know, as a leader, being really intentional about having those conversations, and intentional about having, yes, work side of conversations, but actually beyond that, actually having conversations that just have nothing to do with the workday at all.
Yeah, I think when we get to know each other personally, it builds trust, you know, and so when people trust each other, they become more efficient and productive faster, and they feel more connected. So
the next question, some clients are asking if their usual and assigned technician is vaccinated without reference to a revised health and safety policy. Do you have to have any tips as to how to handle this conversation with these types of clients without losing them?
These are difficult conversations. And I don't think it matters what type of business you are, what type of relationship it is between the people having these conversations. These are really difficult discussions. It seems to be a topic that can really divide even some of the oldest friendships. So you have to be mindful of that before you go into the conversation, but it doesn't mean you don't have it, because that would be worse. And I actually think starting the conversation by calling out how difficult it is and acknowledging that it's a difficult discussion is the first thing to do with those sorts of conversations. The important part is sharing information. And if you look at MB's website and WorkSafe's website, there's that duty to share the position that you're taking and consult on that and discuss it, not just from an employment relations perspective. I talked about the good faith at the beginning, but also under the Health and Safety at Work Act, different PCBUs making different decisions about their workers need to consult, cooperate and coordinate if they're coming if they're going to cross over. And that's a conversation I'm not seeing happening just yet very much, but certainly one that needs to have more. And so I think there's a good human reason to be treating that conversation with care, but there's also a legal reason to be having the conversation in the first place, rather than just boxing on and mandating something.
Great, thanks for that, Gillian. So the next question we've got here, what do you do if your key employee is anti-vaccine? There is no health and safety risk because we're already remote enabled, but we want to reopen partially to maintain our in-person interactions.
Well, if you've decided that being together, you want people together to be vaccinated, if that's the risk assessment you've got to, then the person who's not vaccinated is going to be sitting in a remote position for longer, because they're in a position where bringing them in, if you've decided bringing them in is creating the risk, then they can't be there. There isn't much of a compromise other than keeping the connection going on screen.
I think potentially some of that comes, what you were talking about, Sam, is how do you create that culture and togetherness of teams in a remote environment. I guess there's probably more and more businesses around the world where they don't ever get together at all. So just a question here just around, Sam, so are you able to recap your 4 wellbeing pillars?
Absolutely, I can, but I would say that these will not be as powerful for you because they haven't come from your people. So these wellbeing pillars were designed by our team. However, they are pretty universal, but I would want you to kind of check in that this is what wellbeing means to your people. But the wellbeing pillars were work wellbeing. So for us, that's around kind of the stress of professional services. It's not an easy gig, so making sure that we manage workloads and resourcing and that sort of thing, and are helping people to do their work in a really in a way that helps their wellbeing. Physical health, which goes without saying, I don't really need to explain that. Mental health or mental well-being, and the last one is social connectedness, and that is one that is quite unique, I think, to HumanKind. We really feel like being connected to our peers at work is a really important part of our well-being. So those are the 4 pillars that we landed on.
Great, thank you for that, Sam. And so another one for you, Sam, just around, can you mention your business name again and maybe just give a bit of insight into it? Just I thought it sounded very interesting.
HumanKind or EX Design School? Maybe I'll talk to HumanKind. When I started the business nearly 10 years ago, it was called HR Shop. But very quickly into that journey, recognised that I think the future of HR is employee experience. So wanted to get the name, the letters HR out of our business name. And I always used to describe the way that we used to work with our clients as being very human and very kind. So our wonderful brand agency thought that HumanKind would be a great name for us, and absolutely have not looked back. That's about 6 years ago.
And the Employee Experience Design School, I guess, just a little bit around what led you to go into that space.
Yeah, sure. So EX Design School is really a way for us to spread or live into our purpose even more. So our purpose at HumanKind is to lead humanity at work, and we believe that human-centered workplaces or employee-centered workplaces are going to be the most successful into the future. And so to help more and more organisations to become more human-centered, we created EX Design School with the aim to teach other people how to take a human-centered or employee-centered approach to designing better employee experiences. Really exciting. It's only about a year in, but really sort of humbled by the awesome feedback and amazing impact that the participants are already making.
Brilliant, thanks, Sam. So this is probably one for Gillian. So how do we protect employee privacy where an employee is clearly not vaccinated and these situations crop up and the staff member is then using a workaround such as non-face-to-face meetings?
Well, it depends what you mean by privacy, because their vaccination status will, if it's a small workplace, it's going to become known. It becomes known by almost exclusion. You know, they are not there because. And so it's a conversation with the worker about, well, is that something you don't want to tell anybody? Because it is going to become obvious. You've got to respect the person's choice. And if they say, well, you know, don't want to say why I'm not there, well, then that is their choice, and we need to respect that. But it will become obvious, and I think for some workers where they've been in that position, whilst they might start with that starting point, the conversation is so universal now at home, at work, that it becomes something which becomes known. And I think that's a position which people might hold at the beginning that may well shift in terms of whether they want to disclose that or not. So you just have to respect the person's choice and again, have the conversation.
And this next question is probably a little bit related. And if you're an employer and not vaxxed and staff are, how do you handle this as an employer?
Well, it depends on what the risk is, and it depends on what your depends on what your business is. Because if you're a business which is one where you can all work remotely, or you as the business owner can continue to work remotely, then that's fine. And the key principle is you have what the law requires is that you have a duty as the owner of the business, and you've got personal liability as the officer and director of that business to keep your staff safe. And if you're not vaccinated and you're all coming together into close quarters, you might need to decide not to be part of that if it's decided that being in close quarters is going to create a risk.
I think it's probably another one that's sort of related in the same way. So, obviously it's a very hot topic at the moment, but this is just sort of around, what are your suggestions for managing partnerships where some partners refuse vaccination, knowing that some clients won't enter the premises if they are not fully vaccinated?
Yeah, that's a really tricky one. But again, I come back to, it's a tricky one from a relationship perspective, because you're in business in a partnership, and that's really meaningful. And you tend to think that the people you'll be in partnership with will be like-minded people. But then you suddenly find that there's something new that means you're not. Is that so fundamental that you're no longer going to be in partnership? Or is it something that you can work your way around? I think that's a question for the partnership to discuss. Separately, though, I come back to the Health and Safety at Work Act. You've got a duty. And a partner is a business owner, they are a PCBU, and they are an officer. They've got responsibilities under the Health and Safety at Work Act. And so that is where I think business owners need to be really mindful of that duty, because the position you might want to take around your own vaccination status, that's a very personal decision. It's about you, it's about bodily autonomy, Bill of Rights, I've talked about that. And so that's personal. But you wear other hats. You wear a hat as somebody who takes care of other people, who runs a business, and you've got duties under the Health and Safety at Work Act. So you've got to be really mindful of those. And you cannot, you've got to find a way of those two different things that can be in that position in tension and competing, moving forward with that. So no silver bullet for that one. But what the law is really clear on is if you're in that position, you've got those personal responsibilities as an officer under the Health and Safety at Work legislation. So I would be encouraging people in that position to think about those duties really carefully.
And one sort of still, it's a bit of a tricky one that, this person, we're in a client-facing team members, and one of the team members is pregnant and have been advised not to be vaccinated by their doctors. How do we support them and protect them and our clients?
And again, that's just looking at what are the reasonably practicable steps that you can take to make sure that that person is going to be okay. Now, that might mean initially that you're not, if we're imagining a workplace that's not within the Upper North Island, let's just say it's in Christchurch to make it easy. If you're imagining that workplace, well, what are the reasonably practical steps that you need to have in place there to keep that worker safe? Well, at the moment, we don't have, as far as we know, COVID circulating in the community in Christchurch. So this question, the way you answer this question depends on geographically right now where you are in New Zealand, because those risks are going to be different if you're sitting in the city centre in Auckland versus somewhere else. So you've got to think about where you are and what are the risks for your context and for the alert levels right now, and be really mindful that whatever that assessment is right now is going to shift. Because we've seen this whole story shift since August, and we're going to keep on moving. And that will continue as we have announcements on Friday around changes to the alert level settings. We're moving away from an elimination strategy and an elimination setting And so that means that these health and safety assessments and the likelihood of a worker contracting COVID and the risk to the surrounding community, those two key measures, they're going to shift, and you need to be revisiting those. So don't take a set and forget approach to any of the answers to these questions, because it's going to change.
And a very good point with, I guess, any of these discussions today, sort of wellbeing, great resignation and vaccination debate, that we just have to continue to be abreast of anything that's happening, and that things will continue to change. So to continue sort of looking out there, learning and speaking to others as well. So that's all we have time for today. Thank you, Sam and Gillian, so much for joining our Westpac Smarts discussion today. A discussion full of fascinating insights and practical tips, and hopefully you all got a lot out of it as well. So thank you to all of our audience. I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy Wednesday to join us. If you do have any follow-up questions, please send these to events@westpac.co.nz. An email will also be sent to all attendees with a recording of the webinar, as well as links to helpful resources on wellbeing, vaccination, and the future of work. Finally, I hope you will also be able to join us next Wednesday for the third webinar in our series, hosted by Westpac's Head of Manufacturing and Wholesale Trade, David Hope, where he will be joined by a panel of industry experts to discuss COVID-19 and the supply chain issue. Thank you all again, and I hope you have a fantastic day.